Hi there. This video is on the Lost Targaryen Generation. The generation between old King Jaehaerys and his grandson Viserys I, Rhaenyra's father, who directly succeeded him. That even in the books, George R. R. Martin didn't work out all of Jaehaerys' children for many years. It only was really finalized with Fire and Blood when it came out in 2018. I've been meaning to do this video ever since then, but there was so much other news with House of the Dragon to cover. Now, the relevance of this for House of the Dragon is in the first episode you see old King Jaehaerys briefly at the Small Council. And even though he had 13 children, 9 of which lived to adulthood, he only had 4 grandchildren. So you only really need to know that there was an older son named Aemon and a younger son named Baelon, both of which died before Jaehaerys did, so he had to choose between grandchildren. Rhaenys is the only child of the older son, Aemon, and he married Jocelyn Baratheon, so she's half Baratheon. Baelon, the younger son, his children were Viserys and Daemon, and he married his own sister, Alyssa. So that's, when I said there's 4 children you need to keep track of, 2 of them married each other. And the 4th one, Daela, she married Lord Arryn, and her daughter was Aemma Arryn, who then married her first cousin Viserys, anyway, uniting those 2 bloodlines. So, like I said, you only really need to know 2 of them. Know that there was an older son, Aemon, and a younger son, Baelon, which split the bloodline between the Rhaenys side at the Great Council and the Viserys side, supported by his younger brother Daemon and his cousin wife, Aemma. But there were more than that, and we never got full details for a while. And it was just interesting for the book fandom for so many years. It was literally the Lost Generation when we made, like, family tree charts for fan sites. We just had to leave a dashed line and go, we don't even know the names of these people. And it's not a huge story, sweeping narrative crossing multiple continents, but it was something we didn't know for, over a decade, almost 20 years. It was nice to finally get info on this once we started getting more prequel novellas. So in this video, I'm going to do a brief overview of all the children. Then, second, out of universe, Martin revised this. He changed the children between World of Ice and Fire in 2014 and when Fire and Blood came out in 2018. And then third, I'm going to examine, well, why did he change that? Some of this wasn't just to clarify things, he had new story ideas. Well, to start with, the ultimate canonical version that Martin finally came out with for Fire and Blood in 2018, he listed off these 13 children, some of which died in the cradle, that he made an emphasis, that you're going to see this a lot in House of the Dragon, that even among the nobility, cradle death or death in childbirth is common. It's not unheard of. So Jaehaerys with his sister wife, good Queen Alysanne, their first child, Aegon, died in the cradle in a matter of days. Then his second child was also named Daenerys. There had been a couple of Daeneryses in the dynasty. She died when she was 6 of the Shivers plague. It was a plague called the Shivers. Then the really big ones. Third came Prince Aemon. He was the crown prince for many years. Personality-wise, he was, your Prince Charming, Prince Classic type. He's like Robb Stark. He's the straight arrow. He's the dutiful, good son that everyone likes. He died in just a random minor pirate skirmish. He took a crossbow bolt to the throat. These things happen. Even though there weren't like huge wars at the time, he died in a pirate action. Then the 4th child was Baelon, who was kind of, that whole thing of the responsible sibling, the wild sibling, that he wasn't bad, he was a good guy, but he was kind of, the rambunctious younger brother who isn't as rule-bound, but in a good way, like Oberyn and Doran Martell. That Baelon, they called him Baelon the Brave, because when he was picking a dragon, he smacked Balerion on the snout and nearly got hurt. But his children were Viserys and Daemon, with child number 5, Alyssa, his sister wife. They were inseparable since forever. And she was a tomboy. That she had like a crooked nose, she had heterochromia, 2 different colored eyes. She was a dragon rider herself. She rode Meleys before Rhaenys did. And they meshed really well, that they were kind of these two really wild kids. But everyone liked them. Baelon died of a sudden burst appendix, which is what sparked the Great Council that you see at the beginning of House of the Dragon, that, okay, when Aemon died fighting pirates, Jaehaerys controversially said Baelon will be the heir instead of Rhaenys. And was like, what the hell, that's not how primogeniture works. It's only until his bloodline is extinguished, even with a daughter, that a lord's daughter should inherit ahead of his younger brother. But they made Baelon heir anyway, and that's a whole other issue. I'm going to split that off into a separate video. But then Baelon died, and they revisited the issue that, okay, well, now we have to choose between either Baelon's eldest son, Viserys, or Rhaenys, because there's not quite as much support as before. Still, the vote was 20-1 against Rhaenys, and Viserys became king. Well, 2 years later after Jaehaerys died. Then you get to the younger children, though. Child number 6, Maegelle, everyone liked her. She was very religious, saintly. She became a septa, and tended to the sick a lot. She even volunteered to tend to people with grayscale. Ultimately caught grayscale and died from it. Now when people say, oh, Targaryens are immune to all diseases, not every disease. Like a lot of diseases. They rarely get sick, but they can get grayscale. They can get, like, the tropical diseases in Sothorios that are like super Ebola, like the Nath butterfly plague that they said, unless you have a natural immunity to it, because the natives have a natural immunity, this stuff will make your flesh slough off of your bones in a matter of hours. And the Valyrians never conquered Nath because they weren't immune to that. So there's a couple of, like, super plagues even the Valyrians aren't immune to. Like, they were surprised when Jaehaerys' daughter Daenerys died in the shivers, because they went, we almost never die of sickness. But it's a strong immune system, doesn't mean it's a perfect immune system. Then came child number 7, third surviving son, Vaegon, called Vaegon the Dragonless, because he didn't take a dragon, he became an archmaester. He was very bookish, and he's kind of an interesting character. We've been debating this in the book fandom a lot, and I'm cutting this video short just to get it out before House of the Dragon starts. You could make whole series about these children. Martin had fun making these interesting characters. He loves inventing characters. Vaegon, I've seen other people talking about this more, that he's kind of asexual. That there's this whole thing where, and it's implied he might have had some disorder, I don't know, but like they said, he had no interest in women, he didn't have interest in men. That the maester who was teaching him said, well, I left out books of porn of basically everything. Women, men, beasts, whatever, and he was just utterly disinterested. He seemed like he was asexual, and probably aromantic, as we would call it. But he was like, he became the archmaester of mathematics. He's like, one of those head-in-the-clouds mathematician types he's buried in his studies and isn't concerned with stuff. He wasn't a cruel or bad person, and he wasn't non-functional. They said he was dutiful, that he performed the bare amount of service of, yes, father, thank you. He was curt, token politeness. He wasn't cruel or anything, it's just he was blunt, not very sociable, liked his studies, and he was good at it. So they said, well, let's make him an archmaester, and generally that worked out. And he went off to become an archmaester. And actually, in the books, he's still alive by the Great Council. He's not actually that old. And he's the one that suggested to Jaehaerys, maybe we should hold a Great Council. And they considered him, but he was passed over on account of his vows as a maester, not unlike Maester Aemon. And I'll say this right now rather than bring it up again later. I did the math, like, I wonder if he's still alive by Fire and Blood Volume 2. Because he'd be like in his 70s or 80s by the time the Regency ends, at the end of Volume 1, that, well, it's kind of like how Maester Aemon was left forgotten as this maester at the wall. He may well still be alive and have some part to play, or as like a cameo or something, that history just forgot about him. He didn't care. He liked being this mathematician at the Citadel. After him came Daella, who may have had some kind of disorder, because she was afraid of everything and could barely read, and she was some sort of, I don't know what was going on there exactly. But everyone liked her because she was really sweet, but they said she can barely read, she's not very intelligent, she has crippling fears of, like, cats or butterflies or just anything. So what are we going to do with her? And this whole thing happened that Jaehaerys forced her to marry young just to try to get her out there. He meant well. She married Roderick Arryn, and she liked Roderick Arryn. He was a sweet guy. But she got pregnant too young and died in childbirth, giving birth to Queen Aemma, who you now see pregnant at the beginning of House of the Dragon. And this made a rift in the family if you made her marry too young. Child number 9 was Sarah, who I'm going to touch on this later, was a cruel and malicious girl who eventually ran off to the Free Cities to run her own whorehouse and was disowned. Child number 10 was Viserys, who was beautiful and sly, where Sarah was manipulative and malicious. She was sly, but there's less cruelty there, that she knew how to manipulate people without really being disruptive. She wasn't stupid. She ended up dying in a drunken horse race, and I'll talk more about that later. Then 11 and 12 were cradle deaths, because by this point Alysanne was in her 40s. She was beyond her safe childbearing years. So there was Daemon, who died in the cradle after 3 months, and Valerion, who died just short of his first name day. He was short of 1 year. They thought she'd never have children again, but then child 13 lived, Gale, the Winter Child. She was called the Winter Child not just for the season of her birth, but because, it was the winter of Alysanne's childbearing years. They were surprised she could have a viable child that late. And she was a very sweet young lady, but eventually she got knocked up by a traveling musician, left her pregnant, and traumatized by this, she killed herself. She committed suicide by drowning herself. Alysanne was devastated by this and didn't live much longer herself. That's the final version of all of this, but Martin developed this Lost Generation very late. And this is the second of 3 points in this, and really the reason I made the video. Is out of universe, the co-authors of the World Book, Elio and Linda, they said this was the last thing Martin wrote for the World Book. We got it as a simple sheet of notes a month before we went to print. And they said that the Jaehaerys chapter in the World Book is only 2 pages, and there isn't some other essay sitting on a shelf that we cut for time. What you see is what we got. Martin didn't intend anything else for it, and he just dashed it off right before it went to print. So this really wasn't in his mind before 2014, and there wasn't much thought that went into it. Thing is, he changed the birth order and some of the names around by Fire and Blood, because, he had more time to devote more thought to it. And on top of that, well, you know the story of how the prequel novellas by Gildane started out as in-universe historian. They started out as sidebars for the World of Ice and Fire, but they were all written by 2013, 2014. So the big one on the Targaryen conquest, which is in the World Book, then the Sons of the Dragon through the Faith Militant Uprising, that all existed by then. Then the other ones about the Dance of the Dragons prequel novellas all existed by then. Even the advanced Princess of the Queen copy came out in 2013. And the Regency stuff, which we never got until Fire and Blood, he said that's been sitting on a shelf since like 2013. There was no chapter on Jaehaerys. So when he came to writing Fire and Blood, he said, I think I'm going to write some linker material just to tie the two era, to bridge the gap, because it was a 55-year era of peace, not much happened. I didn't initially think I could write anything about it. And this small amount of linker material turned into a quarter of the book. 200 out of 800 pages in Fire and Blood are new chapters about the reign of Jaehaerys, about him and his children, and they're pretty good, because the other stuff was written to be sidebars. This he kind of knew would be in a standalone book, so he devotes more attention to things and characterization. It's an interesting read, even though he said, well, what can I come up with? A lot of it was, well, the first 12 years, the first half of it, is the 12 years dealing with the aftermath of Maegor and the Faith Militant Uprising, which is good. They're logical questions of the first shaky years of his reign. And then there's a big plague called the Shivers, which guts Westeros. But then by the year 60 after conquest through around the year 90, There's this half of a really long chapter just goes through, and these are all of his other children and what their personalities were like, and in broad sketches talking about them, and they're fighting border skirmishes in Dorne, they're fighting pirates, and it's interesting stuff, and he loves making characters like that. But then by the 90s, it gets into early House of the Dragon, Dance of the Dragon stuff of dealing with the question of after the Aemon, the first son, died, no, Rhaenys can't succeed, make it Baelon. That's more of the backstory to the other stuff. But that thing of how he's doing things with his family, that they're interesting characters, is just there's so much he dumps in there. That he wrote for Fire and Blood, maybe between, I think it was after 2016, maybe like early 2018, he said he was wrapping up the Jaehaerys sections about Jaehaerys and his children. So you have to ask, what was Martin's mental state when he was devoting attention to this in like early 2018 or after 2016, compared to when he was dashing it off really quickly around 2013-ish for the other stuff and wasn't really devoting attention to it. And it's a lot sadder, I mean, because a lot of Martin's friends have died since then, just other writers. Gardner Dozois, who edited the short stories for like Sons of the Dragon, he died. He's been a friend of his for decades. And Martin's been talking about this in his blog a lot, just it's a downer time for him that so many longtime friends died. And you see that in the final chapters of this. As Jaehaerys gets older, it's just people die of old age, like Septon Barth dies. And at the end, it's very sad that he barely recognizes anyone at court anymore, because people he's known for 40 years are all gone. And he outlived almost all of his own children. He had his grandchildren, but he lost a lot of people. And you wonder, Jaehaerys is kind of an avatar for Martin, because he has the same birthday as Martin. If you notice, his birth date is the same as Martin's birthday. So you wonder if this is an author avatar, and that's a major point of that. But first, let's go through what exactly he changed when he updated the name order. He changed 5 things, 4 of which I think were just to streamline it so it makes more sense. He said, a lot of it I changed just because the numbers didn't make sense for the birth order, and 1 or 2 things I had new story ideas for. Well, just rattling off really quickly, what was the original birth order? Let me put them side by side. First you had Aegon, died in the cradle, then Alyssa, Aemon, Baelon, Daella, Aaron, not Daenerys, Aaron, a son who died in the cradle, then Vaegon, then Maegel, then Valerion, cradle death, Visera, then Gaemon, cradle death, then Sarah, then Gale. So I looked at this and I reduced it to 5 points. There's one major change, that Daenerys Aaron thing, but the 4 short ones I'm just going to rattle off. First, Alyssa was older than Aemon and Baelon in the original version. And he probably shifted that, because if you read Fire and Blood, he says, well, we paired up the children, that Daenerys was paired with Aemon and Baelon was paired with the next child, Alyssa. Makes more sense that if she's paired with Baelon, it's like, why wouldn't she marry Aemon as the next oldest son? Makes more sense that she was born after Baelon to pair them off with each other, so I'm not reading anything into that. It was just, oh, this birth order makes more sense. Similarly, original order was Daella, Vaegon, Maegel. Switched in the final version to Maegel, Vaegon, Daella. It's a plot point that Daella died young, because they said you pressured her into marrying too young, and she died from complications in childbirth because her body wasn't ready for it. And this is what caused the first quarrel between him and Alysanne, that she blamed him that you pressured her to marry young. Before the year is out, you will marry and have children. And yeah, I can see how he wanted to make her from the oldest of these 3 to switch her to be the youngest, because it's a plot point that she had children too early and died from it. So okay, that's just a change of the birth order makes more sense this way. Point 3. Originally, it was Valerion, cradle death, then Visera, then Gaemon, another cradle death, then Sarah and Gale. Change this to Sarah, Visera, then the 2 cradle deaths, one after the other, Gaemon and Valerion, then Gale. This just makes more sense, that the whole point is they were really surprised that Gale survived the cradle, because there had been 2 cradle deaths right before that. It lessens the impact if you had 2 surviving children after 2 cradle deaths. Not the same thing. So also, that just makes more sense of how surprised they were that Gale lived after the 2 cradle deaths. Point 4 of the 4 minor changes related to that is this reverses the birth order of Viserys and Sarah. Even ignoring that they moved around the cradle deaths, in the original list, Viserys was older. And it does say just briefly in World of Ice and Fire in a list, she died in a drunken horse race. In the final version, they explain, after Sarah did the whole thing where she was sleeping around, they tried to force her to be a septa as punishment, and then she escaped to the Free Cities. Viserys was smarter than her. She was sly and manipulative instead of demanding. But not, when you're smarter, you're also less likely to do blatantly, stupidly cruel things that it's tragic almost. She said, I'm not going to get away with this, that I don't want to get married. But when they said, you will marry the wealthy but old and has prior children, Lord Manderley of White Harbor, she was annoyed, but she knew explicitly from the example of Sarah that, yeah, I'm not getting out of this. Now, what am I going to do, run away to the Free Cities like Sarah? That's stupid. That she was smarter than that. She knew, okay, I'll go along with it and make the best of what I can do. But she went out, it's sad that she said, people who were with her, she remarked, I'm having one final fling of happiness, having a drunken night on the town before I head north to White Harbor. Like, she was going to go along with it. So she wasn't like Sarah, but she ended up in a horse race, fell off, and snapped her neck. I can also see how this is just due to birth order stuff. It makes more sense that from the example of Sarah, she's the one who would have stayed in line and gone, yeah, I'm not getting out of this, but let's have a drunken night on the town. Just the order makes more sense if this came after Sarah, which is fine. These 4 changes are just, if you sit down and think about it, the order makes more sense this way. What's the one big change he did make is originally the 6th born child was a son named Aaron who died in the cradle. Wasn't even a character. For Fire and Blood, he invented a new character, Daenerys, and it is named Daenerys, who was the first child who lived beyond the cradle to be able to walk, talk, have a personality, but she died when she was 6 in the Shivers Plague. Now I'm getting to my last point. I went through, okay, what was different? Now let's try to interpret it, which is, I used to be sure of this, now I'm not. There were 2 big things that happened with Jaehaerys' children in Fire and Blood, written for Fire and Blood, around early 2018, that I wonder if this influenced George R.R. Martin, what was going on in the world with him. First is, he has a character named Daenerys who dies young and is lost to him. And Jaehaerys is like an author insert. And the second is he drastically expanded what happened with Sarah. Now, even in World of Ice and Fire, it says Sarah betrayed him, that she ran off to the Free Cities, that it even says at the beginning of Rogue Prince, which came out same year, that his dying words, he was mistaking Alysanne for Sarah because he misheard that she had gone over the sea and refused to come back. That was generally in there, but it's drastically expanded. Tell me in the comments, if you've actually read Fire and Blood, just how much attention, how many pages are devoted to Sarah compared to some of these other children. Talking about how she was demanding, she was manipulative, she never did as she was told, she was a total brat, she was a problem child. I'm just putting the quotes up here. And she was constantly pranking her other siblings just to be cruel. And she was really just this shameless liar. And the point when she gets caught sleeping around, this specific incident where they say she just exploded into, this is something psychopaths do, that when you catch them in a lie, they just shift to a different tactic of shifting from denial to dismissal to quibbling to contrition to accusation to justification to defiance. Well, not just psychopaths, any abusive relationship, that when you have someone it's a matter of endurance, that they just keep at you, and They just shift. It's from the, no, I didn't. Maybe I did, but okay, it's justified. Wait, no, I hate you. I'm defiance. No, I'm sorry. Please love me. That it goes through all of those steps, and they say she did this in a torrent for almost an hour, and we're left stunned by her ability to lie like that, that she's this little psychopath, basically. Not that she's like torturing animals, it's just she's cruel and manipulative to everyone around her. Now, the two things I thought were going on, and I don't know if this is true anymore, because it's been a long time since I originally intended to make this. First off, I do think it affected Martin when he's talking about that Jaehaerys is sad that at the end of his reign all of his friends have died. A lot of Martin's friends died, and I think that influenced him at the time. I wondered if he was upset at the time that Daenerys in the Game of Thrones TV show was so drastically different from what he intended in the books. That's one possibility, even I'm not sure of that anymore, because it might simply have been Martin assigning a name Daenerys to a character because he wanted to show Daenerys was a repeated name of the dynasty. And it could have been just as plausibly, and I think a lot more tragically, and I lean towards this now, that he simply was starting to think he'd never finish Winds of Winter, much less the entire series. And that, like, Daenerys is standing in for the series Daenerys, or more broadly, the series itself. 2018, Martin did not think he was going to finish Winds of Winter or anything. Preston Jacobs has a great video about this, which I've referenced before. Martin may have only been done with about a third of Winds of Winter from like 2013 to 2020. He barely got anything done. He was working on the other stuff. He was having writer's block things. He was dealing with TV problems. And he kept starting up and stopping again. But then, well, silver linings. When the pandemic happened, he said, I spent 2 years locked in a cabin with nothing to do but write. And by Preston Jacobs' estimation, he finished over a third of the book. And, you know, the more you get, the easier it is to keep going. That lately, think of the updates we've been getting the past 2 years of how much Martin has gotten done, how he's even finished some of the POVs for Winds of Winter. I don't know if he'll finish the whole series, but he now seems optimistic about at least finishing Winds of Winter now, since 2020. Whereas 2017, 2018, he was starting to look like he might not finish. So, are the children a metaphor for Martin's works? You know, he's always said, my books and my characters are the children I've never had in the flesh. And how much it hurts when bad adaptations happen. Not just this. I mean, other books he's done that never, unrealized projects. I mean, I got the comic book and saw the pilot for that, the Gatekeepers show where it's like Sliders. All of these failed projects that never got realized. When you think about other stuff he's done as a writer, and looking back on his whole life, all the regrets he has about projects that died in the cradle, essentially. So at first I thought this was about, oh, he's angry about what happened with Daenerys in the show, and now I'm starting to wonder if it was on more of a general level, 6-year-old Daenerys who died in the shivers might have been Martin dealing with at the time. I'm worried I'm not going to finish the books. Maybe not even the next one. Nowadays, he thinks he's probably going to finish the 6th one relatively in the next 2 or 3 years. He's making very good progress, relatively speaking. We've talked about this. As for Sarah, well, think where we were in November 2018 when this book came out. At the time, I really read into it that this is David Benioff, because from reports we have, that's what he's like. I mean, a lot of you have seen that Supercuts Delight video that came out last week of stunt accidents, and a lot of it focused on, there's an entire chapter in that interview book about the pranking he did to people, where it was to the point where it wasn't just mean, he was expending so much time and effort on it, it was taking away limited time resources were being spent on pranking people that they might be a director when they're not. And just how manipulative that is. And I realize now I'm reading into that. Simply because, yes, Benioff is an accomplished liar, and we have, like, video of when he's asked hard questions, and he answers by repeating it back at people, or equivocating and dismissing, and, oh, well, you know, that happened, but creatively made sense to us. Like, I kind of get the sense that he's like that. However, and please don't latch on to that, just having had 2 years, 4 years to think on this, I'm no longer as sure if this was him mocking Benioff, but Martin has had a long life, and he's met many unpleasant people, particularly in the industry. Maybe Sarah is based on, like, an executive producer on Beauty and the Beast who he really didn't like, who screwed with him like that. That Benioff might not be the first person in the world who was ever like that, you know. And we keep thinking, oh, he's reacting to something now. Maybe it's something from his childhood. Maybe it's something from the 80s or late 80s. The whole thing with Beauty and the Beast, that the executive producers said, okay, we're killing off the beauty, Linda Hamilton, but within the first episode of the next season, we want the Beast to fall in love with someone else. And Martin was trying to meet them halfway of, okay, he'll fall in love again, but can we have him mourning the female lead for half a season? And they said no. Imagine what kind of goddamn sociopath producer on Beauty and the Beast would have been telling him that and switching between, come on, we can do, oh, it's not a problem, well, maybe it is, but it isn't really a thing. He could have met abusive people before, maybe not even in the TV industry. So I'm wondering if Sarah is based on a real person. At the time when it came out, because it was the height of leading into season 8, I was really convinced it was Benioff, and it could be, but there could be a lot of explanations for it. Have you known someone like Sarah? Because this is a very detailed and accurate description of, like, a narcissistic abuser. But now I'm starting to wonder, I read into things that maybe this is something else from the many decades that Martin has been working in the industry, and maybe his concerns with Daenerys who died in the plague are more generalized concerns about my unrealized works that never happened. Possibly. That I want you to think of, step back and realize, not from an in-universe Watsonian perspective, but out-of-universe Arthur Conan Doyle perspective, like Sherlock. What was Martin's mental state when he was dashing off a quick list of, oh yeah, these were Jaehaerys' children, early 2014 when the World Book was being put together, versus when he wrote the Jaehaerys chapters rounding them out in, like, early 2018 when friends he had were dying, when he was really worried he wouldn't even finish the next book whatsoever and hadn't made significant progress in years, when he was... It might not even be Benioff, because as I said in a recent video, around 2018 is when they were fighting over the prequels. And who knows what arguments he had about them with, like, the Long Night prequel ultimately got canceled. Maybe this is some other separate argument he got into with a different executive producer, resulted in this unpleasant character, Sarah. Simply for the sake of accuracy, I don't think we should read into one specific person. It seems like it's based on someone, but I don't know who. There's many options that he's worked with these industry types for a while. But thinking on Martin's mental state in early 2018 probably wasn't as optimistic. And now, ironically, since being locked in a cabin for 2 years, he's feeling really good about, after all these other failed prequel pilots, they said in, like, the THR interview, he has a lot more internal clout at HBO than he used to. They actually listen to him. He's more hands-on. They're letting him be more hands-on with House of the Dragon. He's feeling good because of House of the Dragon he likes it as an adaptation. And he's making significant progress by his standards on Winds of Winter. He's like 2/3 done. That I don't know if this would be the same if he wrote it today. That the moods that he goes through when he's writing certain things. So, I mean, it'll be weird when, like, he dashes off the next Dunkin' Egg thing, which is short, so it'll be relatively quick. How will he be feeling in his next 5 years of writing? I'm not sure. But that's my thoughts on the Lost Targaryen Generation, that it's nice to have, even if they're not like this exciting conquest generation. It's fun. I wish he'd rounded out more among his many other tasks. That, well, it changed slightly from World of Ice and Fire. Most of these make sense as just, oh, it's the birth order, makes more sense this way, but you turned Aaron into Daenerys, and she dies very young, and Sarah is really expanded into being this very unpleasant, manipulative liar. Should we read into that? What was he going through? But either way, on a more generalized level, you read Jaehaerys and Alysanne dying of old age by the end of their thing, and just Maegor was cruel, but time is crueler, and that they don't even recognize people anymore. Going into the small council and going, these are all new people, I don't know them. All my old friends are dead. was very sad. But now Martin, that's a snapshot of 2018 Martin. 2022 Martin, things have actually been ironically looking up since then. So what is your take on this, on the Lost Targaryen Generation? And I don't think they'd ever appear in House of the Dragon. They mention them in House of the Dragon because this is Rhaenys' father, this is Viserys and Daemon's father, talking about Baelon and his sister wife, their mother, Alyssa, and what they were like, and the inheritance being split between these two older children. And just thinking on that this was the last thing that Martin has had a chance to write, and the tone of it, and what will we see in the future. So please like and subscribe and share your thoughts on this, just because it's the most recent material we have, and I've been wanting to get around to this since Fire and Blood came out, and here we are the day before House of the Dragon premieres, so I'm just racing this off. I'm sorry it's relatively rough. I don't have as many slides as I wanted to, of thinking on the most recent book material we got. And I got one more thing to do after this, and then we'll be up to speed for House of the Dragon tomorrow.